Episode 2, Part 1, A Seat at the Table. Why Communications is a Leadership Function. Part 2 drops next, where we get tactical on the tools that put your message directly into your community's hands.
Well, thank you for joining us for another episode of On the Record, the Public Safety Brief. And my guest today, I'm so excited. Not only is she a fellow redhead, so that's exciting, but she has sat on nearly every side of the camera and the command table. Judy Pal is the founder of 10-8 Communications, one of the most respected voices of public safety communications. And she's a former broadcast journalist, which is near and dear to my heart, of course, who went on to serve as, just to name a few, Assistant Commissioner with the NYPD, Director of Operations for FBI-LEEDA, and Chief of Staff for both Baltimore and Milwaukee Police Departments. She's past president of the National Information Officers Association and the author of the Cops Office Guide, Strategic Communications for Law Enforcement Executives. And today she's training agencies across the country through 10-8 Communications on a variety of strategic communication topics. And Judy, again, I'm so excited to have you on with me today. And just thank you so much for being here.
Oh my goodness, thank you. I really appreciate that. Any opportunity to share information about comms with leadership and executives.
Yes, absolutely. And we have quite the topic to unpack today. So just as a reminder, if you are new here on the record, the Public Safety Brief, it's for people like you doing the hard work of public safety communication, police, fire, sheriff, EMA, public health, local government. And of course, I'm your host, Michaela Thomas. As a reminder, I served also on the journalism side, similar to Judy as well, before jumping over to public safety and serving at a sheriff's office for about 10 years before having the opportunity to land where I am today, which is with you as we unpack best practices, new research, etc., and make your public safety strategy the strongest it can be and in real application, right? Because we say all the time, theory is one thing. How do I do it in real life? And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. And so, Judy, just to jump right into this topic of executive communicator, I mean, the title alone tells us how critical it is that we look at communication at a very high level in public safety. But what I found really interesting with some of the excerpts about your training, the communicator's hardest job isn't always the public. It isn't always the media. Sometimes it's that leader that they are reporting to try to get in that room. Let's unpack that a little bit. Tell me a little bit about that perspective.
Yeah, I think, we have actually done our profession in public safety a disservice to its leaders because we really haven't done a great job in educating them as to the importance of communication. Add to that the fact that PIOs, public information officers, or communications advisors don't have a great rap. Our history was, oh, you're the spin doctor. You're gonna put the spin on this story. You're just doing media relations. That doesn't help communicators either. And I think one of the most important thing that communicators can do and leadership can do is really have a better understanding of the value that a strategic communicator brings to an executive. And that's really all about, it's not PR, it's risk management and reputation development and mitigation of anything bad that happens. And I think if it's sold that way from both the PIO role and the executives understand that, it makes it much more palatable. PIOs of today are not simply the people that put out a news release or go talk to the reporters at an incident scene. It really is, and what I'm trying to push forward to executives is having that communicator on your team who is educated, who is experienced, is going to help you as a leader make better decisions.
Gosh, there's so much there that I could really just jump into. One of the things that I'll tell you, so, and you may have experienced this, I'm curious. So when I left from being a journalist and I joined public safety, I joined actually due to the relationship I developed with the sheriff that I served from being a journalist in the community, right? Which I think is pretty natural when you take that transition. But what I found is getting into that executive room, especially having previously been a known local journalist, there was some hesitation. Our detectives bureau chief specifically didn't really want to unpack things with me. He wasn't super open to, well, hey, Michaela, here's what's going on. And he would even make jokes with the dry sense of humor that many folks have in this industry. Well, I don't want you to go tell everybody, or I've got to be careful what. And I said, listen, I'm on this side of things now. I have that maturity to know what can be released, what can't be released. But let me explain to you why holding on to some of this is going to do us a disservice. We don't have to know everything now to say something, right? And that was a unique challenge to navigate with someone so well respected, but to say, hey, I'm here to tell the story appropriately, to tell the story truthfully, but ultimately to tell the story.
Right. Yeah. And, I get away from the word story. The word story bothers me a little bit only because it sounds like, oh, you're making something up, right? Our job, especially in public safety, is convey facts, convey information that is going to help our community stay safe. And that challenge, I think every person who is a professional staff person, I don't call folks civilians that work especially in law enforcement, professional staff people, have that challenge. But it's also the PIO's responsibility, especially if you're coming from the media or you're a civilian coming into law enforcement. It's our job to start understanding that culture. And I think that's something that I'm finding in my conversations, especially with a lot of major city chiefs. And it's shocking to me when they say, but my communicator doesn't understand what we do. And I went, you got the wrong communicator, because our job as communicators is to get a complete understanding of what I'm dealing with. So whether it's culture, which is super important because internal communications often is just as important, if not more important part of our job than external communication. And also, again, having them understand the importance, because it all comes back to trust. One of the things I've been focusing on a lot lately is AI and how artificial intelligence, especially AI generated content and imagery, is affecting trust. And I'm sure you are probably aware of Edelman's latest trust barometer for 2026 when it came out, and talked about people's trust bubbles are getting smaller and smaller and smaller, very insular. We trust a very local group of people. So part of our job is earning that trust within our own group of people. And that comes with, one, explaining, like what you said, explaining what my job is to do. And I found the best way to endear yourself, especially to those folks in homicide, Office of Professional Standards, is explaining how the media is going to cover the story. And then when they see it the next day or later the afternoon, well, how did you do that? Well, because I know, and I'm going to help you look good. No one wants to look bad on camera. And that's one of the things that I found was super helpful working with agencies, is doing the training, giving them the tips and tricks that are going to help them. Even just doing a webinar, don't be looking up, don't be looking down, look at the camera. Like those kind of things really help develop a trusting relationship that you're on their side, not on the side of the media.
Yeah. And I love that you highlighted truly immerse yourself in that culture internally, because, gosh, it's one of a kind. And one of the things I did specifically, and I think it came from having doing ride-alongs when I was a journalist, to cover that, get that nat sound, cover that real story, right? And then translating that over to your point, don't call it a story. We're sharing the information the public needs to know so that they are properly prepared, so that they understand, because it's easier to align yourself with a certain group if you understand their perspective, if you understand, but you have to share information for anyone to understand you, right? So I actually spent time, especially in the jail. I really prioritized the jail. We had a jail at our sheriff's office, and our corrections officers, for example, when highlighting who the folks were behind the badge so that the community could truly get to know us. your deputies are out there on the road. They're the SROs. They're stopping at the coffee shop. Folks seem to be a little bit more, they're more visible. They're somewhat easier, I say that carefully, to understand than a corrections officer who you never see. I spent time in the jail. I sat down and watched them do the walks. I sat down and observed what they were doing every single day and sat on a whole shift with them when they're working the midnight shift and they're up every 3 to 5 minutes to do the walk to check on the inmates and truly understand that culture, to be able to tell that, to share that information. And especially with recruitment, because communicating that a lot of times falls into that division. We need new people. How do we explain to them the value of this position? When I started to do that, the detective, the chief detective of the Detectives Bureau, really started to open up. And it became to where I would be one of his first calls. Hey, this just happened. Let's go ahead and start getting things prepared. Here's what I know now. And perfect, fantastic. I'll start getting something drawn up because this is going to need to be shared. We need to let folks know they already saw the cruisers down the street. We need to figure out what to explain to them, what we can release now. As that relationship grew and that trust grew, our communication strategy became so much more powerful. It was really great to see that transition. And of course, I felt good because finally you understand I'm here, I'm on your team. Some of these veterans, they weren't too sure about having a journalist join the team and be part of the conversation. But I think that's getting a lot more common today. So,
yeah, I think they need to understand that when we talk about transparency doesn't mean here's everything. Transparency means being clear with the information that you're providing. And I think that's where, people get scared of the T word. And it's like, no. And honestly, everything that you were doing is what we need to do to build that internal trust. Plus, we have to be able to build that same trusting relationship with our chief executive, because again, you've got a chief executive who purportedly should know a little bit about everything. And oftentimes executives are a little hesitant to say they don't fully understand the value of communication. I was very fortunate when I worked for the NYPD. When I was going to work there, I sat down and met with the commissioner, and this is the commissioner of the biggest municipal police department in North America. And the reason I went to work for him, he said, Judy, I don't know what I don't know about communications. And that was a huge peek at humility. And that was also someone that I said, I can work with this person because they're going to listen to the expertise and the scar tissue and everything else that I'll bring. He's still the boss, still makes the final decision, but really totally understand that I don't know about this. Just like you and I, couldn't plan a no-knock search warrant. They can't plan, how to communicate something. And I think that's something for communicators to understand, the difference between being just a PIO. You're not just a PIO. I want that paradigm shift to the fact that you're the communications advisor to your chief executive. So when someone comes to you, and this happens to PIOs everywhere, we need you to put out a news release or make a flyer or put this on social media. No, that's you being tactical and being focused on outputs. The question you push back to that person is, what's your final outcome? What do you want from this? And then your smarts is going, oh, that's not a news release. We're going to have media come in and look at the new dog. We're not going to put out a news release about the new canine we have. But I think we have to get in that position that PIOs need to be comfortable to push back and say, no, wait a minute, I'm the expert on communication. Tell me what your outcome is, and I will plan the outputs that match. Unfortunately, too many of us are in the position where they say, we need to put a news release about this or do a news conference tomorrow. And then we just go, yeah, we have to be able to be comfortable enough to say, no, that's not how this is going to work.
I couldn't agree more. And, and I also, working at the sheriff's office, was absolutely blessed with a sheriff who believed in communication, believed in my position and what we were trying to do, and allow us to build that relationship, and even sometimes in very creative ways, which was a wonderful place for me to grow those skills to be able to do that. But we have to be in a position, and it is hard, especially I think for those who didn't um, start in this field. If they did start as a journalist in a civilian position or anywhere, and they move into this, sometimes that's even harder to shift into a role of, you're in a paramilitary when we look at law enforcement environment. And now I am in a position where I know what the right direction is, but I need to be able to prepare myself to share that information properly, in a very respectful way, but still at the same time, I'm not on this team to just nod my head and say, yes, this is what we're going to do because that's what you said. So I'm here to say, well, hold on, well, think about this, consider this option, and this is the outcome that we want. To your point, what if we did it this way instead? And we propose it in a way that is, I'm going to give you a different option that I feel would be more powerful and successful. Ultimately, what the boss says is what we do, but at least I'm fulfilling what I'm here to fulfill, which is to utilize my expertise as a communicator and someone who has a marketing background, to say, here are the steps 1 through 5 that we need to get folks to show up to our Coffee with a Cop program. It
Right.
isn't one flyer and you shut it off. It's going to be consistent communication. It's going to be commenting back sometimes. It's going to be ignoring the comments others. And that is the balance that we have to have. And so what a great way to approach that, to say, hey, I'm on your team. I want to see this agency succeed. Let's think about it this way and unpack.
Right.
What would you say, Judy, though? Say you have a leader who is very much leaning into, slowly, the idea of communication being a top, I'm going to use the word tactical step in any incident. So we know that if there's a crash, we have to get the crews out there on scene. We know that we have to close down the road. We know that we have to notify our partners to say, hey, this road is closed. We need to put it out on our social media channels, our app, whatever the case may be. How do we work in with a communicator, a leader who may be leaning into that more slowly, that we also need to have that priority for communication to our residents, to our community, that this is happening? How would you recommend that folks approach that?
Look, I think what most leaders have come to realize, especially in the law enforcement realm, is that trust is everything. Again, I go back to trust, and trust really is built with one-on-one relationships in person. This is why, and it's funny, I was the person who 5 years ago was like, do not have an app. No one needs to download another app on their phone. And now I've made a complete 180 and said, no one knows what media to trust. Have an app, develop that trusting relationship on the app so people will go there when the bad thing happens. I think that's one of the things that we can do. But the other is this. I think it's really important that communicators tell their bosses that people will trust us when they know that we care. And that is a huge part of being able to communicate. The biggest challenge we have as communicators is we'll often have legal, which my biggest battles were legal. I'm sure some of yours were as well, saying, don't say anything, don't say anything, don't say anything. I understand there's litigation, there's things. But we also have to realize that if we don't say anything, people don't know, one, what we're doing, two, that we cared about what happened, especially if we're dealing with an in-custody death, with an officer-involved shooting, with any kind of use of force. People need to know. The leaders need to lead. The leaders need to step out in front and say, I'm going to deal with this, whether it's a justified use of force or an unjustified use of force. I want people in my community to understand my leadership stance of where I am. And especially for sheriffs, it's extraordinarily important because they're going to be the person who's going to be either reelected or not. And for other leaders in public safety, whether you have a job tomorrow or not, it's all very political now. So being able to do that is extraordinary. You need to have community support for us to be able to do our job. And especially in law enforcement, there it's the only profession that I can think of from a government perspective that we need the community's support to allow us to do our job. We're not going to solve crimes without people telling us information. They're not going to tell us information unless they trust us. Hence, we have to be able to communicate. So being able to convey that information to those chief executives is super important. And I think the last thing is the fact that as a communicator, we tend to look at the whole picture. So around that table with the chief, he is, his command staff or her command staff is saying, okay, you're the finance guy, you're the legal guy, you're the operations guy, you're the SWAT team leader, you're this, you're this. You're the one, the communicator is the one sitting around going, okay, I'm looking at the whole thing and how this is going to be seen internally by our elected officials, by our community, and I'm going to be able to give you hints, strategy that is going to help make this work. No one else is thinking about that around the table. So you become a very valuable resource to your chief executive by being able to do that.